So here we are with part two. We'll pick up with O'Connor's Good Country People. Hopefully you found the link in the syllabus that you can go and read it. Hopefully you did that. Fabulously interesting, weird short story. Again, O'Connor loves the freakish stuff. That's what ties her really into the Southern Gothic thing. The violence, the relationship to the past, the haunting past, as we were talking about, but also the violence and the strange and unusual, the freakish things. What are some of the elements that are similar to those in Revelation? Well, we have a younger female who is disgruntled. We have an older female who is very satisfied with the way things are. And of course, Hulga is the younger one. Her mother is not so concerned about righting the world's wrongs as Hulga is. Hulga's gone off to college and gotten a PhD in philosophy and is very dissatisfied with the way things are. So in a way, you've got a real opposite of Ruby Turpin here with Hulga. She sees the world and says, I don't like the status quo. I don't like the way things are. I hate the fact that everybody's a bigot and everybody's old-fashioned and nobody wants to change. And why aren't people more progressive and forward-thinking and maybe woke? I don't know, whatever people use today for the terminology. And she sees herself, like Ruby, though, sees herself as superior to others. In this case, she's superior because these people are a bunch of backward hicks. I, however, am educated and sophisticated, and I know best because I went to college, and these little people didn't. That becomes her undoing, right? Because when the Bible salesman, alleged Bible salesman, Manly Pointer, oh, and if you don't understand the, Freudian significance of his name, well, then you missed something. Go back and reread. She thinks she is his intellectual superior, and yet he dupes her. Right? He really pranks her good. And it's a weird prank, isn't it? So there's some elements in here that are similar, some characters that are similar. There's some themes that are similar about self-awareness and self-perception. And are you what you think you are? Who do you think you are? Right? That comes back at you when you think you have the world figured out. Maybe you don't. All of those things that you have to deal with. What is Manly Pointer really after? Well, you think he's after one thing, but when he lures her up into the barn loft, you find out he's after something completely different, isn't he? He collects things from people that he's stolen from. He's not, okay, so you're thinking, maybe like I did when I first read the story, you're thinking he's after her for sexual purposes, right? And she thinks that's the same thing, and she's going to just magnanimously offer herself to this poor, simple boy, and yet she finds out that isn't what he wants at all. What he wants is her wooden leg. And in fact, he takes things from people like that, like a glass eye and other things, because they're trophies to him. He's not interested in the intimacy of her sexually. He knows that there's something much more personal, much more intimate about her than sex, and that is her leg. The thing he wants is the thing that she's most self-conscious about, the most embarrassed about, he wants more than just sex with her. That's not good enough, right? He wants to see her leg, and he wants to take it on and off and see how it works, and then he wants to run away with it. It's the weirdest thing. You think, this is really weird. So if you've never read this before, the first time you read it, yeah, it's kind of creepy, weird, and freaky. So there's the grotesque, there's the freaky, there's not really violence so much, but there is this shock, this crisis, this revelation, because he leaves her with this, lady, I've been believing in nothing all my life. You ain't that smart. In other words, you didn't need to go to college and get 3 degrees and a PhD in philosophy to believe in nothing. You could have saved your tuition money, lady, because I'm just like you. You're no better than I am. You don't have anything more in life figured out than I do. You've done all of these things and gotten all these degrees, and what's it gotten you? Right back to where I am. I could have saved you all that time, trouble, and tuition, lady, because I don't believe in anything either. You think this Bible salesman thing of mine is for real? No way. Bunch of hicks? Yeah, that's what y'all are, not me. She thinks he's the simpleton. He just plays her for a fool. Now, the central theme of this, it has something to do with learning, knowledge, self-awareness. Who's the real phony is what he's asking. You think I'm a phony? You're the phony, lady, because you think you're better than everybody else. And you know what? You're stupider than a stump because you let a hick like me fool you. That rocks her world. And again, the open-ended question, what's she going to do with this revelation? What's she going to do with this new knowledge, this thing that happened to her? And maybe it wasn't violent, but it was psychologically traumatizing for her to allow him to do this to her, to manipulate her like that. It knocks her down a notch. It really does. And the end of the whole thing is left wide open, including how she's going to get down from the loft, which is kind of a practical matter as well. So what I want you to see is that O'Connor is trying to present you characters who have something happen to them meaningful with their lives, but it's very open-ended as to what they're going to do with that knowledge and that meaningful experience. And I think she's doing that in part because she believes that that happens to all of us. At some point in our lives, if we're paying attention, we're sort of dinged on the head by something. Could be a book, could be something else. And it's up to us how to respond to that. Are we going to change? Are we going to open our eyes? Are we going to say, wow, I got to rethink the way I'm approaching my life? Or are we just going to go humming and whistling along and living in our little cliched world and figuring, foolishly thinking we have the whole world figured out? It's an interesting thing, O'Connor's short stories. One of my favorite writers. Sadly, O'Connor died of lupus at a fairly young age. I think she would have been a great writer if she'd continued on and had a longer career. Now we're going to talk about somebody who did have a very long career, Eudora Welty. There are several short stories that she's very famous for. She lived quite a lengthy life. I want to look at some things here. The importance of place, narrative techniques, and the characters and what they reveal about themselves and others in her short stories. And the one that I've chosen that I think is kind of fun and funny is Petrified Man. Now, this is very unlike almost any other short story and that you've read because it's designed not so much to revolve around plot, although there's a plot, there's action, there's something that happens, but it's really about appreciating the characters and how they present themselves. And I know that most of you probably didn't grow up in the South. You certainly didn't. You're nowhere near as old as I am, okay? But in the South, beauty parlors back in the days, and that's what they used to call them, beauty parlors, beauty salons, were social beehives. They were where ladies went a lot more often than they do now. They must spend a ton of money on hair stuff back in the day when they poofed their hair up and they did just all these fancy hairdos and things, and they spent Lord knows how many hours and how many dollars on how many chemicals to do their hair. But it was a place where women hung out and would gossip. I mean, men did that too. It was called the barber shop, okay, or the local bar, right? So no one's any better than anybody else. This is just where we do it, right? This is where you would catch up on all the local gossip and everything, especially in a small town. So this is all about character sketches, and particularly working class white Southerners who, Eudora Welty comes from and finds very funny. And this is let's face facts. She's making fun of them, okay? And in doing so, she's making fun of where she comes from and this self-deprecating. So look at it as self-deprecating humor. The dialogue is what's key here. What's fun is to imagine these characters and how they talk and how they must look. The gum smacking and the expressions that they use and all of those things there. So let's walk through it real quickly, because it opens up with dialogue. This is all about the dialogue, listening to the character. So you've got Leota, and I just love that name, Leota. Leota, reach in my purse and get me a cigarette without no powder in it if you can, Miss Fletcher, honey, said Leota to her 10 o'clock shampoo and set customer. I don't like no perfumed cigarettes. Now, why would you start a short story with something like that? That seems like a trivial piece of dialogue, isn't it? But what it tells you is a lot. Number one, you get her, you get Leota the way Leota is, right? Just, the kind of language she uses and the style of talking and voice that she uses, and the fact that she not only smokes cigarettes, but she puts them in her purse and they get powder all over them. And Miss Fletcher gladly reached over to the lavender shelf under the lavender frame mirror, right? Lavender, 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 right? This is like over the top. Shook a hairnet loose from the clasp, etc. Why, look at the peanuts, Leota, said Mrs. Fletcher in her marveling voice. Honey, them goobers been in there my purse a week if they's been in a day. Miss Pike bought them peanuts. Right? Listen to the accent. Miss Pike bought them peanuts. Them peanuts been in there a week if they's been in there a day. Right? So the fun of the short story is listening to the voices, right, in your head as you're reading the dialogue, and trying to imagine these people. And so we proceed to hear the story of Leota, who has a brand new friend. And her brand new friend is Miss Pike. Now, she's been friends with Miss Fletcher, but she and Miss Fletcher are not exactly on the same social standing, okay? Both are middle class, but Miss Fletcher thinks of herself as being a little bit better than the lady who does her hair. And Leota sort of sees themselves as pals and such. But at the end of the day, Miss Fletcher's a little bit jealous of Leota's new friendship with Miss Pike. You ever had a situation in school when you were a kid? And, you're good friends with somebody, and then all of a sudden some new kid shows up, and now your best friend is good friends with somebody else for a change. And you say, hey, wait a minute, this person horned in on my best friend. What's going on? And then, before you know it, they drop that friendship, and they're back to you again. It's almost like you have a friend breakup and a friend relationship, and your friend was cheating on you as a BFF, right? But then the new person goes somewhere else, moves away or whatever, and then they're back with you again as your best friend. Kind of stuff happens. You get a little jealous and upset about it. So that's a little bit of what's going on here. It just so happens that Miss Fletcher is pregnant, and everybody knows about it. And in that day and age, somebody like Miss Fletcher didn't want people to know, and she's kind of upset. Who was it? Honey, I really couldn't say. Not that you look at... Where's Thelma? I'll get it out of her. Now, honey, I wouldn't go and get mad over a little thing like that, right? So you hear the voices in the beauty parlor, the chit chat, and she's the subject of gossip. Everybody knows that she's pregnant now, and so on. Well, Leota gives this wonderful story within a story about something that happened with Mrs. Pike. Mrs. Pike and her husband go out with Leota and her husband, and they go to the freak show. Okay, now back in the day, they used to have circuses and carnivals come into town, and one of the things that you could do in addition to ride on rides is you could go see the circus freaks. Okay, the strong man, the bearded lady, whatever, all these kinds of things, the Siamese twins or whatever, and really, really low-class stuff, right? I mean, you wouldn't go to respectable people didn't go to freak shows for entertainment. But Leota is lower class. I'm not going to say she's white trash. She's just lower class, working class white from Mississippi, and she's just going on, rattling on and on about the adventures that she had. And here's what they saw at the freak show. She says, we went to the traveling freak show yesterday, right? You see the use of dialect, yesterday after work. You ought to see those twins in a bottle. You really owe it to yourself. So they've got these like twin fetuses preserved in formaldehyde or something. It's just really horrible stuff. What twins? Well, honey, they got these two twins in a bottle, see? Born joined plumb together. Dead, of course. Leota dropped her voice into a soft lyrical hum. They was about this long. Pardon, must have been full time, all right, wouldn't you say? And they had these two heads and these two faces and 4 arms and 4 legs all kind of joined here. See, this face looked this away and the other face looked that away, over the shoulders, see, kind of pathetic. Glaw, Mrs. Fletcher said disapprovingly. Well, ugly, honey, I mean to tell you, their parents was first cousins and all like that. Billy boy, get me a fresh towel from off the teeny stack. Wait, me and Miss Fletcher, we ain't one speck of kin. Me and Mr. Fletcher aren't one speck of kin, or we could never have had one. Or he could never have had me, Mrs. So Mrs. Fletcher has to go out of her way and say, my husband and I are not related. Well, we wouldn't assume you would be, okay? I wouldn't think so. Why are you so defensive? Of course not, protested Leota. Neither's me and Fred, not that we know of. Well, honey, what Miss Pike liked was the pygmies. They got these little pygmies down there, too, and Miss Pike was just wild about them, the teeniest men in the universe. Well, honey, they can just rest back on their little bohunkus and roll around and you can't tell if they're sitting or standing. That'll give you some idea. They're about 42 years old. Just suppose it was your husband. as though husbands are determined by lottery or something, right? I mean, I'm not sure you would necessarily be attracted or have anything in common with a person like that. Well, Mr. Fletcher is 5'9.5". Right? So my husband's not small, right? Relax, lady. Don't be so defensive. Fred's 5'10", but I tell him he's still a shrimp on account of I'm so tall. Well, these pygmies are kind of dark brown, Miss Fletcher. Not bad looking for what they are, you know. And then there was this petrified man. He could move his head like this. Of course, his head and mine ain't a joint, so to speak. And I guess his stomach ain't either. Not yet, anyways. But see, his food, he eats it, and it goes down, and then he digests it. Leota rose to her toes for an instant, and it goes out of his joints, and before you can say, Jack Robinson, it's stone, pure stone. He's turned to stone. How'd you like to be married to a guy like that? Again, she thinks marriages are by lottery or something. Like you wake up one day and go, Dadgum, I'm married to a petrified man. How'd that happen? I don't know what she thinks, but all he can do, he can move his head just a quarter of an inch. Of course, he looks just terrible, right? And so they go and see Lady Evangeline, and she relates it. So then, cut to the chase. They come back like the next week. Mrs. Fletcher's back in there. Leota's doing her hair again. She's getting ready to, I guess, have her baby or what have you. And then all of a sudden, the Ms. Pike thing is all broken up, right? That friendship was a temporary friendship, and Leota's really angry at Ms. Pike because of one thing, and that is she invites Ms. Pike to go over and live with she and Fred, like she and Claude, at their place. And she comes across a magazine, Real G-Man, or whatever it is, Startling G-Man, I guess it is. And she asks her husband, oh my gosh, there's a wanted ad in the Startling G-Man. Now, G-Man was slang for government man, which means FBI magazine, right? So back in the 30s, back when they were fighting like Al Capone and all this, they would have magazines and movie reels and things about what the G-Man or the FBI and Herbert Hoover were doing, or not Herbert Hoover, J. Edgar Hoover was doing to fight organized crime. And they, it's sort of like America's Most Wanted. She finds this guy's picture in the Startling G-Man magazine. Come to find out he's a rapist, he's on the loose and everything, and Ms. Fletcher gets the reward for it and doesn't share with Leota, which Leota thinks is pretty playing dirty pool. That's what she thinks. You're cheating on me. And she says, not really petrified at all, of course, said Mrs. Fletcher. Meditatively, she drew herself up. I'd have felt something, she said proudly. Shoot, I did feel something. I told Fred when I got home. I felt so funny, right? I knew, boy, he was petrified, and that wasn't just the thing that made me feel funny. There's something about him. I thought, now you know what he was. He's a rapist, and they knew it. He raped 4 women. And so they go on and on about it. She's angry at Miss Pike and everything. The end of the short story, one of the most interesting and most famous lines, Billy Boy, the rotten little brat that keeps running around all over the place, right? Billy Boy stomped through the group of wild-haired ladies and went out the door and flung back the words to Leota. If you're so smart, why ain't you rich? Right? So she's been sitting there telling everybody what she did and how she was wronged and how she knew this and knew that and the other. Billy Boy puts it all on the head of a pin and says, if you're so smart, how come you ain't rich, lady? Guess what? Ms. Pike got the money, not you. So you're not that dang smart. So it's a great little one-liner, and it's an interesting piece. The petrified man story is really kind of a vehicle just to let us see who these people are, because what she's wanting to offer you is kind of a slice of life in the South. Number one, look at the structure of the piece. Okay, it's laid out as kind of 2 stories within a story, right? Within a bigger story. It's kind of interesting. There's the big story, which is the short story itself. Within it, you've got 2 sub-stories that Leota's telling. Early Ms. Pike and later Ms. Pike. Look at the setting. It's again like the doctor's office in Revelation. It's pretty much all within the beauty parlor. That's where it all takes place. And then of course the voice. We get to hear this conversation in a small town beauty parlor. It's like we're sitting there waiting to have our hair done, and we get to hear all this secondhand. And of course that's what you're there at the beauty parlor for, not just to get your hair done, but find out what's going on in town, right? Look at certain things like class, right? Leota is working class, white, poor. But she's not a mean, bad person, right? You could probably say Ruby is. But she's not a mean person. She's not an awful person. She's not some bigoted person. She's just kind of rough around the edges. And Welty sort of admires people like that. She's who she is and doesn't mind. She's not the least bit embarrassed about who she is. Not a mean bone in her body. Just kind of, beer drinking, good time gal. Notice the sense of loss here. Now, it's not loss in the historical sense, but she lost out on something. She lost out on money. She lost out on the reward money, right? There's a crazy sort of upside down outcome. And the purpose of the story in part is to question the sense of fairness or justice in the world. And Billy Boy's remark at the end kind of makes you wonder whether Welty is telling us there isn't any fairness or justice in the world. Just money goes to he who's the quickest, right? If you're smarter than the other fella and you're faster than the other fella, you get the money. If you don't, you're who you are. That ties back into the fact that Leota, working class woman, $500 would be a lot of money in her world, but she didn't get it. And she feels like, I deserve it. I deserve it. I was right. Billy Boy says, you know who deserves it? The person who got it. That's who deserves it. So maybe what Welty's trying to teach us here is, listen, life's not fair, right? Money and success and therefore a rise in your status, right? Lower class. The Leotas of the world are always going to be the Leotas of the world because they keep thinking life's going to be fair to them when it's not fair. I don't know. You decide what you think it is. I don't think that the main purpose of the story is to convey some sort of deep theme about life so much as it is to admire and appreciate the characters and get a kick out of it. And just interesting. You ever sat at a restaurant, you're one booth over from some people telling a really interesting story and you can't wait to find, you're not supposed to eavesdrop, but you got to admit, sometimes it's kind of fun to overhear what the heck are they talking about, right? This is the fun of what Welty's trying to recreate for you in a short story and show you a little bit of what life is like in small town Mississippi in the 1930s. Okay, so for our quiz number 8, this is going to be due on Sunday at noon, Sunday by noon, okay? We're a little bit late. I'm one day posting this because I gave you guys a one-day extension on the paper, and I didn't want to overwhelm you on that. So this lecture was supposed to go up on August 1st. It's now August 2nd. We're going to move the due date for the quiz back just a little bit. One, what's the name of the book that Ruby's hit with in Revelation? What's the title of that book, okay? Name 3 items, specific items in Manly Pointer's case. When he gets up in the barn, he opens up his case, he shows Hulga some things. What's in there? Very interesting things. And number 3, how does Mrs. Fletcher come to the realization of who the petrified man really is? What was the event? What was the thing that made her go, aha, I know who this guy is, right? So send that to me to my Yahoo email by Sunday at noon. I've also sent out an email talking about the final exam in the last few days of this final week of our class. You want to make sure you refer to that as well. Okay?